Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has arrived in Germany for a set of meetings amid the ongoing Russia-Ukraine war. Zelensky has landed in the country for an in-person meeting with German Chancellor Friedrich Merz. This will be followed by a virtual meeting with other European leaders and U.S. President Donald Trump. The latest round of talks comes just days ahead of a crucial and the first face-to-face meeting between Donald Trump and Russia's President Vladimir Putin for Ukraine peace talks. This will be the first meeting between both leaders after Trump became president for a second term. The meeting is being held in Alaska on the 15th of August. Following the announcement of a U.S.-Russia summit, European leaders released a joint statement welcoming the development for peace talks, but said that Ukraine's future cannot be decided without the country's direct involvement in peace negotiations. On the other hand, Russia has called Europe's diplomatic stance and involvement on Ukraine's behalf as quote-unquote insignificant. Russia's foreign ministry official accused the European Union of, quote, sabotaging U.S.-Russia joint efforts in ending the war, and said that consultations sought by the Europeans are politically and practically insignificant. All right, joining us live on the broadcast is James Jackson, who is a journalist and political analyst. James, welcome back to WION. It's no surprise that Europe is definitely concerned, but also Ukraine. Do you think that they're talking about convincing Russia for some kind of security guarantee at the end of the day? And how likely is that?
Hi, Susan. Nice to see you. So I actually feel like the Europeans and Ukraine are more focused on convincing President Trump than Putin and Russia, because ultimately the Europeans know that they are somewhat dependent on American security guarantees and arms supplies for Ukraine, as well as troops in Europe to defend them against what they're fairly united in seeing as the Russian threat, which comes from the East. So ultimately, I think this is almost a show to, they realize that in the modern age of geopolitics, what matters is what Trump thinks, and what Trump often thinks is what the people who've spoken to him most recently are saying. So they're trying to make sure that they're present, that they show Trump that they are united, that they also want peace. But, whether they actually want a peace deal which sees Putin's Russia able to wrestle away two oblasts or regions of Ukraine, Donetsk and Luhansk, from Ukraine using force, going against the international order that borders should not be moved by force, which is consensus around the world and international law since the Second World War, of course, much of which was fought on European soil. And so this law is more keenly appreciated in Europe than in other parts of the world. So particularly the US at the moment, with President Trump speculating about taking over Greenland, parts of Canada, Panama. That hasn't been mentioned in a little while. But I think right now the Europeans are almost desperate, but they don't want to appear desperate to Trump because he doesn't like weakness. So they're putting on a united front, show of solidarity. And, it's a fair show. I think Ukraine feels, and Zelensky will feel more at risk than anyone else. You see him there coming all the way to Germany just for a video conference, which I think shows you how important this is. He's not known to travel for video conferences generally. The president of Ukraine is more known for speaking to Congress, and you can see he's wearing actually a black military fatigues there after criticism from Trump and Vice President J.D. Vance that he didn't look professional enough in his meeting in the White House. So he appears to have taken some of that criticism on board, cuts quite a distinct figure from Friedrich Merz, who himself is seeing some choppy waters domestically in Germany at the moment with a record low approval rating, mostly about domestic politics, about communications. I would say Merz is quite heavily backed by the German population and by his own party on these issues of foreign policy. Other issues are more controversial. So ultimately, I think Europe knows where its bread is buttered. They know that they need to keep the US on side, and that FaceTime with the big boss, to use a corporate terminology, of course, Trump comes from business, is the way to do that.
And James, as a political analyst and a journalist, what will you be looking at when President Trump and Vladimir Putin meet in Alaska? What kind of questions will you be asking?
I think the real question is whether they will achieve a peace deal. You know, even though Europe isn't keen on Russia gaining more territory and becoming, more aggressive, people do want this war to end, if possible, and they would prefer a Ukrainian victory, but that doesn't seem particularly likely now. So ultimately, I would be looking out for whether Putin and Trump actually can hammer out a deal that's acceptable to Europe and Ukraine, or if they're going to go over their heads, or if this is just going to be a photo op for Russia, which undermines the International Criminal Court. And I think that's a huge, huge possibility. Ultimately, Vladimir Putin is wanted by the ICC, and all signatories are supposed to arrest him if he comes to visit. Now, the United States is famously not a signatory of the ICC. South Africa, however, was and invited Putin and didn't arrest him. We've also seen Hungary do the same with Benjamin Netanyahu. So it's a big question for international law and the normalization of Russia. Ultimately, the best thing that the Russians can do is continue to take land by force and normalize that. And the question on my lips would be, is this going to normalize Russia, this meeting in Alaska, or is it going to bring about peace? Quite possibly a bit of both.
Yeah, and that normalization, I assume, is what Ukrainians and, of course, Europeans are concerned about the most. Well, James, thank you so much for all of that, for your analysis. Of course, we'll be covering it very closely, and we'll be watching the days ahead and the hours after this meeting. I look forward to speaking to you again very soon.
Thanks for having me.
For all the latest news, download the WION app and subscribe to our YouTube channel.